when I first arrived in the state of Maine, generally the United States, in August 2014, still at the airport, Logan, in Boston, I had to choose who I was, either African American, Latino, Caucasian, and I chose Caucasian. I never identified myself with color. And it was a surprise. And I thought that Caucasian might be countries like Somalia would come under there. And the officer had to correct me. And when we drove up to Yarmouth, a small town in Maine, the country was shaking with the death of Michael Brown, a young black man who was shot and killed a day earlier. And the Black Lives Matter was just starting, and the country was in a shift. But I was confused. I had no idea what was going on. Yarmouth is one of the whitest states in the United States. And the town that I came was a little over 7,000, predominantly white. So the family that took me into their house had to give me a tour. They took me around the neighborhood, and we knocked at doors, and they said, "Don't call 911. He's with us." So I wrote the book Call Me American because I thought that America was an idea. I grew up in Somalia, and Somalia is still going through one of the longest, bloodiest Africa's civil war. In 91, when the war erupted, I was either 5 or 6, and we lost everything. House, my dad's jewelry for my mother, and then we lost our father. He didn't die, but he disappeared until a few years later when he comes back, and all this time we were orphanages. And when he came back, and I talk about this in the book, how life has completely changed. It was my mother's nomadic instincts that had saved us while she took us from one place to another place, escaping gunshots and militias and brutality. So a pen, a pencil, a book, all those things didn't exist in my life as a child. In fact, they were nowhere to be found. Like if I wanted to buy a pen, my P's and B's are the same. And I still dream in my native language. I haven't started dreaming in English, which is weird. And I think it takes about 5 years or 6 years. 30 years? Okay, I'll wait. So New York Times and Washington Post, and I think the world's biggest newspapers had published pictures of young, malnourished faces on the front pages in late 1992, and that had forced American Marines to get involved to provide humanitarian assistance because Somalia's war was now coupled with a famine, starvation. I lost a sister to this, and I almost died until the humanitarian assistances had arrived, and we went and found some food, and I brought it to my mother, and I brought it to my sister, so we sort of woke up, risen from the death. We almost died. And then the Somali warlord gets into a war with America, and they made a movie out of this called Black Hawk Down. And Americans realized that we didn't come here to fight, we came here to provide food, but if they're fighting, so we gotta get out, so they got out. When they left, that's when things got even much worse, right? Because we're still going through the war, the famine still exists. But at this time, at the age of 7 or 8, I stood up and I said, one way or another, I have to provide for my family. And I have an older brother, and my older brother and I took a journey every single day to an old hospital, and that was the only place in the entire city where you could find running water. Thousands of people lined up, bringing their jerry cans. But the way between our house or the place where we were staying at the time and this old hospital where you can get the water was invested with snipers, militias that were interested in shooting people for practice. Just for practice. They shot at us many times. So we came up with the idea that it's better to do at the dark when nobody can see you. And my brother and I had no shoes, so we were tiptoeing all the way. Sometimes there's a little, sound, and they shoot. And when we crossed to the other side, my brother would check all over my body to see if there's a bullet wound or something. And while we did this many times, it became normal. It didn't even become a danger. It became part of our life that we went that way. Some days we couldn't come back all night because the line was too long, and we had to wait until dawn, and mom would suspect that we died because the chances of dying was so higher. It was brutal. It was chaos. It was just, as you can imagine, death was an option at the time that we had really hoped for, but it had never happened. Well, as an entertainment, I went to a movie theater, a local movie theater. And when I say movie theater, it's not like the fancy ones that we have in the United States. It's just a little television with a pile of cassettes, and this was all action movies. And I had watched these action movies, to Terminator and the Commandos, over and over and over, and that's how I picked up most of my English words. I put them together, and I walked from street to street on the safer areas in my neighborhood, and I tattooed all the walls of the city with English words, most of them curse words. The Americanization process began. And then as time went, the movie was part of my life. So Somalia is a Muslim country, and as a Muslim, I wasn't supposed to watch movies at the same time go to a madrasa. So this has become a conflict with my mother's dreams, where she was sending me to the madrasa to graduate and become a leader, an Islamic leader, someone who preaches the word that I had learned from the madrasa. But the madrasa teacher's tactic was to beat us in a way to memorize the Quran, and beating us with a bundle of sticks that he has in his arms. And this is still typical in Somalia. It's happening 2019 to my own nieces and nephews. So I went to the madrasa all the time, while the movie was like a thing that I never told to the madrasa teacher or my mother. When they figured it out, they had to drag me out of the movie, and I was hanged all night at the madrasa just as a punishment, and I thought that was the last day of my life because my feet wasn't touching the ground. But the next morning when the door was opened, I was half dead. And I was carried home, and the next day I had to go back to the madrasa again. So every single time that I tried to do something good, life had been a torture. But graduating from the madrasa in 1998 gave me the freedom to ignore my mother's orders and run away from the house and stay on the streets while I was going to the movie theater. And I told the woman at the movie theater, I said, I will clean this movie theater from spider webs and everything else if you let me watch the movie for free. And she was okay with that. And I continued what I really liked. I became a translator in the movie. I would say, he says he's gonna jump off that window, and the guy jumps off the window and falls on the ground, and my friends trusted me. They said, it seems like you're accurate, so we'll trust you. They started giving me a nickname that I really loved. I was called Abdi American. That's why my book's called Call Me American. And did I have any idea where America was? I really had no idea where America was. Somalia has one of the longest coastlines, so looking through that beautiful blue waters, I thought that America must be behind these waters. Maybe if someone canoes, they could get there. That was what I was thinking. And when my friends called me American, The America that I knew was just an idea, not a country, not a continent. Just the idea, I mean, you know, the Marines that came, great, these people in the movies. Oh, look at Eddie Murphy, Denzel Washington, Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know, Sylvester Stallone, Bruce Willis. It was just a combination of the things that you can imagine. And I thought that, well, you know, Somalia could be a country, but this is the place where everyone belongs, because we're a homogeneous society in Somalia. There's no white or black. There's no Muslim or Christian. There's just one faith, one color, one language, and we're all one people. We're fighting over tribes. We have tribes within our own society. And then that's why I thought, well, you know what? The only way out of this is to get to America. I had no idea how to do that. But anyways, I pursued my movies and picked up English as much as I could. When I turned 20, Somalia's civil war shifted from a civil war to an Islamic state. We had a group of radical that were chased out of Afghanistan and Iraq, and they took over Somalia. And my life had become extremely dangerous, because that was the moment I was beaten so badly for walking with a girlfriend to the beach. Speaking English was a crime. Listening to music could cost your life. And I started telling my stories. I got a cell phone, I recorded my stories. I went to the cyber cafe. I uploaded the audio diaries that I recorded. I sent it to NPR, and NPR aired it. Americans listened to them, to the radio. They jumped in, they contributed, they said, let's get in touch with this young man. And then there was a team called Team Abdi that was built. And Team Abdi reached out and they said, well, you know what, let's get you out of Somalia, first step number one. Great. But where should I go? Now I realize that America is not across the ocean. Kenya has closed its border because the Somali Islamist group was attacking Kenya from our side of the border, so they massed troops. The only option was to catch a flight and go somewhere else. So I went to Uganda and smuggled myself illegally into Kenya. And I joined my brother who was there as a refugee. And next day I gave up. I showed up at the United Nations headquarters and I said, I'm here to officially register myself as a refugee. And the officer said, yeah, that's what we do. Every Somali has to be registered as a refugee. So he took down my name and he wrote 1/1/1985. And I said, what do you mean 1/1? I was born June 20th. So I was trying to come up with a date. But he said, no, you're wrong, because every Somali that we register was born on January 1st. So you will go by January 1st. So it was against my will, and I was really angry that I had been forced to accept January 1st as my birthday. I was trying to be professional. June 20th, World Refugee Day, was my birthday, but no one had accepted that. With Team Abdi still involved, I tried a student visa to the US, and the officer who interviewed me, the American embassy, told me that's not gonna happen, because a student visa called F1 visa means if you go to the US, graduate from college, you have to come back. And he asked, are you coming back? And I said, no. I will definitely not come back. I will seek asylum in the US. He actually laughed and he said, there you go. That's why I can't give you the visa now, because that's against the bureaucracy. I said, well, yeah, but what can I do? I need to get to the US. He said, I don't know, good luck. Well, I was devastated, again, because life in Kenya as a refugee was a permanent life. Like, you cannot find a job, you will never be a citizen, you can never drive a car, you will just be there for the rest of your life. That's what it felt like, because the first wave of Somali refugees in 1991 that came to Kenya had been there. They haven't built a normal life. They have always been a refugee. And my American dream was sort of crashing, and I wasn't quite sure what's the best way to get to the US. If I was in Mexico, I would definitely cross the border, but I was too far away. And then one day I was having tea with my friends. Some of the same friends that actually sat at the movie theater with me called me American, but this time we're all grown up. I looked across the street and there was a something that looked like a coffee shop, but they had some computers inside where you can use to browse the internet, and there was also a note that said apply to the green card lottery. So I applied the green card lottery, and I was selected. And the process took me a year. And for those of you who heard This American Life episode about my story, Abdi and the Golden Ticket, that was me. And that is where the story begins. It's 1 hour of craziness. Somali group attacks Kenya, and the Kenyan president declares a war on the refugees, basically saying deport them or put them in prison. And my brother and I couldn't leave the apartment for 3 months. 3 months, and we were drinking water, and someone delivered a bread by a bicycle, and Team Abdi were confused. They had no idea what to do with this. The Bernie Sanders office sent a letter to the U.S. Embassy complaining about this, and there were other senators that from Maine, from Michigan, that the team put together, and they said, this is what you cannot hear on the news. But this young man emailed us, and what they're going through is incredible. And one of them, it's me and my brother, and they said one of them won a lottery, and he has the right to come to this country. Well, I didn't give out much of the book, so you'll read it. Yeah. So, and I realized where I started the story now, a few minutes ago, how America, the America that I dreamed of as a kid, the America that I had stood up and fought against everything else to say, like, this is the only place in the world that can make you who you want to be. Of course, I became an author. That's a great thing. I hated to be identified with my color, but I had to accept that that's the reality that exists in this country. But the fact is that the stereotypes, the prejudice, the things that we face every day, I realized that few incidents in Maine where I had faced racism from people who had completely misunderstood who I was, or because I'm an interpreter, I'm a community activist, and I am out there speaking out loud in my native language with someone who doesn't really speak English. And I find that this is the only country where you can do that. Just speak to your fellow person who comes from the same country, speak the native language at the DHHS or at the hospital or this or that, and then when someone walked up to us and said, you're all living on welfare, was just a joke. Because I said I had been a refugee in Kenya, and I had been a displaced person in Somalia. But you know what? The U.S. When I arrived in Maine, in the U.S., the government did not consider me as a refugee. So I was considered as an immigrant, and which is totally different from a refugee. And I deserved to come to the U.S. as a refugee because I had all the requirements that you can prove. You had to be displaced out of your country by conflict. Your life had to be at risk, which I had been, definitely threatened. But somehow the government ignored all of that. When I got myself here, through the lottery, I wasn't treated as a refugee by the system. So that means I haven't received any assistance at all, not even a trauma or PTSD assistance. So I had to start working next week, get myself some money and start hiring someone to go through the trauma process, and started running and used the bike and went to the gym, and I did all of this to entertain myself and get myself away from the past. So I don't really dream in English. I don't know why. I wish I could. So at nights when I go to bed, my life's completely different. I'm out in Somalia, hanging out with my mother and running away from danger, and I wake up sweating. So I really prefer not to sleep at nights. I wish I could just hang out, and I could be fine by that. But I sleep here and there. So that's my story, and I hope you guys read Call Me American.